It's Christmas Eve, 1926, New York City. 60 people are rushed to the hospital in a single night. By morning, 8 of them are dead. By the end of that holiday season, 23 more are gone. The doctors know what killed them. It wasn't a disease, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't bad luck. It was poison. And here's what the doctors also knew, but couldn't say publicly. The poison didn't come from criminals. It didn't come from bootleggers. It came from the United States government. Your government deliberately, knowingly, intentionally poisoned the alcohol supply of its own citizens. And when people started dying, they didn't stop. They added more poison. By the time it was over, at least 10,000 Americans were dead. And the officials responsible called it, and I am not making this up, a noble experiment. This is the story that history books don't tell. The story of how the American government declared a secret chemical war on its own people and got away with it completely.
To understand what happened, you need to go back to January 17th, 1920, the day America went dry. At midnight on that date, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution took effect. Prohibition had begun. The manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol was now illegal across the entire country. It was the result of decades of campaigning by the temperance movement, religious groups, women's organizations, moral reformers who believed that alcohol was the root cause of poverty, crime, domestic violence, and the destruction of the American family. And in theory, it made sense. Get rid of the alcohol, get rid of the problems. But here's what they didn't account for. Americans liked to drink. A lot. Within weeks of Prohibition beginning, illegal alcohol operations were springing up everywhere. Bootleggers began smuggling whiskey from Canada and rum from the Caribbean. Hidden distilleries appeared in basements and barns across the country. Speakeasies, illegal bars, opened in every city. By the mid-1920s, New York City alone had an estimated 30,000 speakeasies operating openly. Think about that number. 30,000 illegal bars in one city. The police couldn't shut them down, partly because many of the police were customers. The government had a serious problem. Prohibition wasn't working. People were drinking more than they had before it was banned. The law was becoming a national joke. And the bootleggers had a clever solution to keep the supply flowing. Industrial alcohol. See, not all alcohol was banned under Prohibition. Alcohol used in manufacturing, in cleaning products, antifreeze, paint thinner, was still legal. It was produced by the billions of gallons every year. The bootleggers figured out that if you could steal this industrial alcohol and purify it, you could sell it as drinkable whiskey. And millions of Americans would buy it because it was cheap and available. The government knew this was happening. They knew exactly what was going on. And their response, their official, deliberate, government-ordered response, would become one of the darkest chapters in American history.
Here's where it gets sinister. Industrial alcohol, even before Prohibition, was already being treated with additives to make it undrinkable. This process was called denaturing. They added things like methyl alcohol, wood alcohol, and other foul-tasting chemicals to discourage people from consuming it. But by 1926, the bootleggers had gotten good at removing these additives. Chemists working for organized crime had figured out how to purify the industrial alcohol and strip out most of the denaturants. The government's response? Make the poison impossible to remove. In 1926, the Calvin Coolidge administration, through the Treasury Department, ordered a dramatic escalation of the denaturing program. They demanded that industrial alcohol manufacturers add an entirely new cocktail of deadly chemicals to their products. The new formula included, are you ready for this? Methyl alcohol, wood alcohol that causes blindness and death, kerosene, brucine, a plant alkaloid closely related to strychnine, gasoline, benzene, a known carcinogen, cadmium, iodine, zinc, mercury salts, nicotine, ether, formaldehyde, chloroform, camphor, carbolic acid, quinine, and acetone. They demanded that up to 10% of the total product be methyl alcohol, wood alcohol, the most deadly ingredient of all. This wasn't a secret formula hidden from public view. The New York Times ran a headline that read, word for word, "Government to double alcohol poison content." Americans read that headline and they kept drinking anyway because they had no choice. It was the only alcohol available. Now, here's the critical question that nobody in the government seemed to be asking. Did they know people would die? The answer, documented in government records, is yes, they knew. Charles Norris, the chief medical examiner of New York City, publicly warned the government. He told them in plain language that people would die, that the poor would die disproportionately because they couldn't afford the safer imported spirits, that what the government was doing was not law enforcement, it was execution. The government heard him, and they added more poison.
December 24th, 1926, Christmas Eve, New York City. The hospitals started filling up in the afternoon. First, a few cases, then dozens. By midnight, 60 people had been admitted to Bellevue Hospital alone, all with the same symptoms: blindness, convulsions, paralysis, organs shutting down. The doctors recognized methyl alcohol poisoning immediately. They had seen it before, but never at this scale, never this fast, never this many people at once. 8 people died that night. Over the following days, as investigators traced the source, the truth became impossible to deny. The poison hadn't come from criminal bootleggers cutting corners. The poison was exactly what the government had ordered to be added, at exactly the concentrations the government had mandated. The United States government had poisoned its own citizens on Christmas Eve. 23 more died over the holiday season. And across New York City that winter, the bodies kept coming. Norris and his team documented case after case of methyl alcohol poisoning. Blind patients, paralyzed patients, dead patients. Norris stood up publicly and said something that no government official wanted to hear. He said, "The government knows it is not stopping drinking by putting poison in alcohol. It knows people are dying. The only way to describe what is happening is this: it is our national experiment in extermination." Extermination. The chief medical examiner of New York City, a man who dealt with death every single day, used the word extermination to describe what his own government was doing. His warnings were ignored. The poisoning program continued, and the deaths continued with it. Here's something important that the history books almost never mention. The people dying weren't wealthy. The rich could afford imported Scotch whiskey from Canada. They could afford French wine. They could afford the good stuff, the alcohol that didn't go through the government's poisoning program. The people dying were working-class Americans, factory workers, dock workers, immigrants, people who couldn't afford the expensive imported spirits and had no choice but to drink the cheap domestic stuff, the stuff that came from the poisoned industrial alcohol supply. The government knew this. They knew exactly who was dying and who wasn't, and they kept going. One government official, when confronted with the death toll, reportedly said that people who chose to break the law by drinking knew the risks. Think about that for a moment. The government had secretly poisoned the alcohol supply without telling anyone, without any public announcement, without any warning, without any consent. Just death. And then, when people died from that poison, the official response was, well, they shouldn't have been drinking. The victims of this program didn't just die quickly. Methyl alcohol poisoning is one of the most horrific ways to die. In small doses, it causes blindness. The
the optic nerve is destroyed permanently. People who survived sometimes woke up one morning and simply could not see, never again. In larger doses, the progression is brutal: nausea, vomiting, severe abdominal pain, the feeling of being burned alive from the inside. Then the nervous system begins to fail, paralysis sets in, then the organs, then death. And all of this was happening to Americans who had done nothing more than have a drink at a speakeasy, while the government officials who ordered the poisoning went home to their families every night, ate dinner, slept soundly, and reported to work the next morning to continue the program. By 1927, the death toll was climbing toward the thousands. By the time Prohibition finally ended in 1933, conservative estimates put the number of dead at 10,000 Americans. Some historians believe the true number was higher. Not everyone stayed silent. Charles Norris, the New York medical examiner, kept publishing his findings, case after case, name after name. He documented the dead with meticulous precision and presented the evidence to anyone who would listen. He called the program by its real name: murder. Not negligence, not an unfortunate side effect. Murder. His colleague, Alexander Gettler, one of the first forensic toxicologists in American history, ran the chemical analysis on the bodies. He could identify exactly which government-mandated chemicals were killing each victim. He published his findings in medical journals. He testified before city officials. They were largely ignored. Some newspapers began covering the deaths. The New York World ran an exposé. Journalists documented the rising body count. The stories were picked up nationally. But here's where it gets truly revealing about how power works in America. The response from Washington was not to stop the poisoning. The response was to attack the doctors. Government officials publicly questioned the motives of Norris and Gettler. They suggested that these doctors were sympathetic to bootleggers, that they were undermining law enforcement, that they were, in essence, on the wrong side. When a doctor stands up and says your government is killing people, and the government's response is to question the doctor's loyalty, that tells you everything you need to know about who that government is serving. Members of Congress debated the ethics of the poisoning program. Senator James Reed of Missouri stood on the Senate floor and said publicly in the official congressional record that if people were stupid enough to drink illegal alcohol, they deserved to die from it. A United States senator on the floor of the Senate saying Americans deserved to die for the crime of drinking a beer. No outrage, no consequences, no resignation. The program continued, and the bodies kept piling up. Prohibition ended on December 5, 1933. The 21st Amendment was ratified. Americans could legally drink again. The speakeasies closed or became legal bars overnight. The bootleggers moved on to other businesses. And the poisoning program? It just stopped, quietly, without announcement, without investigation, without anyone being held responsible. No trials, no prosecutions, no congressional investigation into the deaths of 10,000 Americans. The officials who had designed and implemented the program retired quietly, received their government pensions, some wrote memoirs. None of them went to prison. None of them were even charged with anything. The deaths of 10,000 Americans quietly filed away. Case closed. And here's what should make you genuinely angry. This wasn't a secret. At the time, in the 1920s, it was reported in newspapers. Doctors were screaming about it. The New York Times had written about it. The Senate had debated it on the floor. But within a generation, it had been almost completely forgotten. The story wasn't in history textbooks. It wasn't taught in schools. Ask any American today, ask your parents, your grandparents, and almost none of them will have heard of it. How does a government program that killed 10,000 of its own citizens disappear from the national memory? The answer is, it doesn't disappear by accident. Stories disappear when the people responsible for them control the narrative, when the winners write the history books, when there is no one left to demand accountability. The families of the victims got nothing, no apology, no compensation, no acknowledgement. The New York Times headline, "Government to Double Alcohol Poison Content," sits in archives, accessible, real, documented. Nobody was ever punished for what it described.
Now, I want you to think carefully about what this story actually reveals. Because this isn't just a story about Prohibition. It isn't just a story about the 1920s. It's a story about what governments are capable of when they decide that an outcome is worth any cost. The officials who designed the poisoning program were not monsters in the way we imagine monsters. They were bureaucrats, lawyers, politicians, people who went to church on Sundays, people who loved their families. They sat in offices and made spreadsheets and approved formulas. They wrote memos about methyl alcohol concentrations. They attended meetings about denaturing ratios. And 10,000 people died. Not because of hatred, not because of cruelty, at least in the conventional sense, but because the government had decided that a policy goal, ending illegal drinking, was worth the collateral damage of American lives. Sound familiar? Think about MK Ultra, which we covered in our last episode. The same logic, the same justification. The government has a goal. The means to achieve that goal involve harming Americans. The decision is made anyway. The people responsible retire comfortably. And here's the question that should keep you up at night. If the government poisoned alcohol in the 1920s, if the CIA experimented on citizens in the 1950s, what is happening right now that we won't find out about for another 30 years? What is being approved in offices right now by ordinary people in suits attending ordinary meetings that will one day be called one of the strangest and most deadly decisions in American history? We don't know. And that's exactly the point. 10,000 people. Let that number sit for a moment. 10,000 Americans who wanted nothing more than to have a drink. Working people, factory workers, fathers and mothers, immigrants who had come to America for a better life. They didn't die in a war. They didn't die in a disaster. They didn't die because of some unavoidable act of nature. They died because their government made a deliberate decision to poison them. And when they started dying, kept going. The man who called it a noble experiment? Herbert Hoover, the 31st President of the United States. His words, his description. Noble. 10,000 dead Americans. Noble. Charles Norris, the doctor who fought to expose the truth, died in 1935, 2 years after Prohibition ended. His findings were largely forgotten within a decade. The victims of the poisoning program have no memorial, no monument, no official acknowledgement from the United States government. Their names are not remembered. But we remember them here. Because the only way to stop history from repeating itself is to know it happened in the first place. If this story made you angry, it should. Share it, because most Americans have never heard it, and they should. Think about this before you go. Your government poisoned alcohol in the 1920s,
and called it noble. Your government experimented on its own citizens in the 1950s and called it national security. Both times, the people responsible faced zero consequences. Both times, the story was buried for decades. Both times, most Americans never knew it happened. What does that pattern tell you? Subscribe to Obsidian Files. We open the files that were meant to stay closed. Next week, another secret, another cover-up, another chapter of American history that somebody powerful hoped you would never find. Some things are buried for a reason. We dig them up.